Start.
Well, welcome everybody, and I'm so excited to introduce this webinar, Elevating the Status of Leadership Education and Development. Gama Purici was going to be the moderator for this panel, and I am substituting for him in the last moment. For those of you who don't know me, and that's many of you, I promise, my name is Sadhna Hall. I'm the Deputy Director of the Rockefeller Center at Dartmouth College. So why is this webinar important for all of us as leadership educators? For me, personally, having seen leadership at a community level, at a policy level, at a government level, and now at an academic institution, I strongly believe that we have to be committed to absolutely creating the conditions for really moral and ethical leadership. And so there are ways of doing this. And leadership, yes, can be taught. And we have an amazing panel with us today from the Dorr Institute at Rice University and also from the University of Colorado. So I don't want to spend too much time on talking about why I personally feel it's important. Let's hear from those who've been working on it. So let's start with Ryan Brown, Managing Director for Measurement at the Dorr Institute. Take it away, Ryan.
Thanks, Anna, and thank you also for stepping in at the last minute to serve as our moderator in Gama's place. We really appreciate your doing that. So thank you. I thought I would begin by framing the panel and our discussion today around this book that came out back in January. Tom and I, along with our colleague Libby Gill, wrote the book Leadership Reckoning. And the subtitle of the book, you might not be able to see it on the slide, is Can Higher Education Develop the Leaders We Need? I should note, by the way, this book is available for purchase for Father's Day, for those of you looking for a last-minute Father's Day gift. You might not be able to get meat this Father's Day, but you can get Leadership Reckoning. So in this book, we outline what we claim is a fairly severe problem in higher education. And the problem is twofold. First of all, if you look around at colleges and universities in the United States, what you'll hear from them is that they are developing the next generation of leaders. You'll see that in their marketing materials, their recruitment pamphlets, their television commercials, in many cases, their mission statements, and even sometimes in their school mottos. We are developing leaders. The second part of the problem, though, is that there isn't a whole lot of evidence that they're actually doing that across the board. So you have, on the one hand, this rather bold claim, we're developing leaders, and then on the other hand, a lack of evidence, consistent evidence, that they're actually living up to that claim. Now, why do I say that there's a discrepancy here? Why do I say there's not much evidence that colleges and universities are living up to their own claims? Well, there are a number of reasons for that, and I'll cite two of them. First, a number of years ago, we took it upon ourselves to contact 50 or 60 universities in the US to find out what they were doing to develop students as leaders. Now, these were not randomly selected institutions. They were taken from various who's who lists. At some point, all of them had been identified by someone as an institution that was doing a good job developing students as leaders. So we contacted all these schools, hoping to, first of all, just get the lay of the land, to see what's going on out there. And second of all, we're hoping to get some good ideas that we could import to our own university, to Rice University, to learn from the best of the best. And what we found was really disappointing. First of all, there was, generally speaking, no one in charge. So we would get routed from the provost's office to the president's office, student affairs, to various other people on campus until someone could answer our question, what's going on at your institution? What's happening? And no one ever seemed to know all that was going on. They could point to various pockets where a class was being taught, or a weekend program was occurring, or a retreat was happening. But there didn't seem to be any coherent, concrete strategy or plan for how the institution was developing students as leaders. So that's one piece of evidence for our claim that there's this discrepancy between what universities and colleges are saying and what they're actually doing. The other comes from some of our own data from here at Rice University. And Carla, if you could advance the slide, that'd be great. A number of years ago, we decided to administer a campus-wide survey measuring students' leader identity. And we got, what I'm showing you here are data from undergrads and grad students across campus who had not participated in any formal leader development programs, which is most of the students, the vast majority of them. What you can see in the blue and the green lines is basically over 4, in the case of undergrads, or 5 years in the case of grad students, not a whole lot of change in leader identity. And that's important when you consider what leader identity means. Leader identity encompasses the extent to which students see themselves as leaders. They define themselves that way. They feel confident to lead, and they're willing to lead when the opportunity arises. So in other words, when you look at this graph, if you squint a little and kind of turn your head, you can see a slight uptick in the blue line, not much going on there, and actually a slight downturn in the green line. But basically what this graph is showing you is that when students graduate, either with their bachelor's degrees or a graduate degree, they're no more confident or able or willing to lead than they were when they showed up. So they're leaving essentially with high school level abilities as leaders if we take their own statements at face value. And in the absence of any evidence to the contrary, I think we should believe them when they say they're the same when they leave as they were when they came. So this is a real problem for us in higher education. We're claiming to develop the next generation of leaders. And it's clear that we're educating most of the people, the vast majority of the people that will be leading in the future in government, in business, in the arts, and in education. Formally and informally, we are educating them. We're feeding and housing them, but are we actually developing them? Those are actually different things to educate and to develop. And so this is the problem that we point to in the book. And the question is, can anything be done about it? On this same graph, you see the red dotted line at the top. And what that's showing you is where students wind up in their leader identities after 1 semester of professional leadership coaching, which is one of the programs, just one of the programs that we offer to students at the Dorr Institute. What that's showing you is that it's possible to change leader identity with a professionally developed, evidence-based, rigorously measured program. It's possible to change this, but it isn't going to happen all on its own. It's not going to happen just because we want it to. It's not going to happen because students are getting an excellent education, as they are here at Rice, in the classroom. It's only going to happen if we apply what we know about how people change. It's only going to happen if we use professionals, if we use evidence-based strategies and programs, and if we rigorously measure the outcomes of these programs to make sure that what we're doing is actually making a difference. That's what we argue in the book. And at the very end, we offer up an invitation to other universities, to other institutions that are interested in raising their game and in taking leader development more seriously for their own students. In that context, we talk about a couple of initiatives that Tom's going to talk about next in more detail. One is a consortium of schools, and both Carla and Aaron are going to speak to this in just a little while as well, and a new elective classification system in leadership for public purpose that is hosted by the Carnegie Foundation. So Tom's going to talk about that in a little bit more detail, and I'll hand it off to him at this time.
Well, thanks, Ryan, and thanks for all you do in terms of measurement. You know, many people have told me in passing that leadership and leader development can't really be measured, that it's too ephemeral, that it's impossible to measure. And Ryan Brown is a myth buster. he has shown that these things can be measured and was really one of the first people to point out the deficiencies in higher ed, which are pretty profound. The fundamental circumstance is higher ed does not treat leader development the way it treats other important educational goals and processes. That's just a fact. And that's essentially how we got to write Leadership Reckoning. And we're very proud of that book. Ryan and I have both written several books, but a book in itself is a collection of ideas. You know, we can publish the ideas, we can get them out there, but you know, John Doerr, the venture capitalist who gave us the endowment to start the Doerr Institute, has a saying that always drives what we do in the Doerr Institute. And what he says is, ideas are easy, execution is everything. And so as we came up with these ideas and realized how important they are to ensure that higher education can provide society with the leaders it needs, we needed a way to make sure that that happened. So the first thing we did was immediately form a consortium of other colleges and universities, because this is not about us. And the second thing we did was come up with a mechanism to be compelling, to encourage schools to participate in this and self-examine. And that's the Carnegie classification that we've built. And I'll just tell you a little bit of a story about how that was built. And the story starts with Dr. Carla Ortega Santori, who's with us on this call. Carla is a brilliant industrial organizational psychologist. And from the very beginning, she has seen the value of pulling together colleges and universities to work on this as a collective. So in January, 14 months ago, not last January, but the one before that, we hosted 37 representatives from 37 schools at Rice. And Carla pulled them together, and we built a self-examination tool for colleges and universities to look at themselves university-wide and make some determinations as to whether or not they were doing a good job, or any kind of job, at developing students, faculty, and staff as leaders. For the past year, Carla's worked with that consortium and has grown it from a fairly small group at the beginning to now more than 83 colleges and universities representing 1.9 million students. The self-examination tool that we started out with is now proposed as an elective or optional classification with Carnegie, Carnegie Foundation for the Advancement of Teaching. Carnegie, as you probably know, currently categorizes every college and university in the United States, but they also have optional classifications. So what we've proposed is an optional classification in leadership education and development called Leadership for Public Purpose. And it's not a rating or ranking, and it's certainly not any kind of accreditation process. What it is a way of self-examining to improve. It's based on improvement science. And improvement science is a thing. If you look up that term, you'll see that the Carnegie Foundation has used this strategy for a long, long time. We have vetted that with more than 100 scholars. Carla has managed a 13-school pilot, which is coming to a close soon. And we're really happy. We're really excited that there is a compelling way to get this idea out and also create an execution strategy for all 4,800 colleges and universities in the United States who care to receive the classification. So with that as an intro, I'd like to introduce Dr. Carla Ortega Santori and let her talk a little bit about this massive, impactful project that she has done such a great job pulling together. So Carla, over to you.
Thank you, Tom. And this application that Tom mentioned has been, like he said, in the works since January 2020. So it's been a long time coming. We've revised it and reviewed it. And I'd like to talk a little bit about that application, which this classification kind of centers around and is what ultimately schools will have to fill out to apply for the Leadership for Public Purpose elective classification. So let's take a look at the framework used in the application. And I'll start with the idea of leadership for a public purpose. This self-examination, like Tom said, will ask you to look at how leadership for a public purpose shows up throughout the college or university. But what exactly is leadership for a public purpose? This is defined as going beyond the instrumental or functional leadership, and it focuses on the pursuit of collective public goods like justice, equity, diversity, and liberty. It can apply to all forms of industries. It's applicable to the education industry, nonprofit, business industry, and operationally, what does leadership for a public purpose look like on campus, you might wonder. And campuses that show this commitment will do it by developing abilities in all stakeholders. So stakeholders include students, faculty, and staff. They will also contribute to the public understanding of leadership by producing research, the execution of leadership education, and finally, it also prepares students for a life of leadership, essentially producing more and better leaders, which is what we're all about. And this application has 6 sections that you can see on the screen. Let's go through these sections pretty quickly, and we'll do a deeper dive into one of them so that you can have an idea of what kind of data this application will require. So the first one, campus and community context, is meant to gather information on the institution's context. Because applications go through a review process, reviewers will need to evaluate each application as a whole and according to the corresponding context, since no single question is used as a litmus test, and they need to be able to evaluate the whole picture. So in the US, the schools and colleges would probably use IPEDS data or demographics to describe their campus and context. Under foundational indicators, this will look more at policies, norms, routines, and practices within the university or college. Leadership curriculum will delve deeper into credit-bearing coursework available to students that is related to leadership. So questions like, what % of faculty is teaching leadership courses? Or what, if any, course designators are used to identify leadership classes? So for leadership co-curriculum, it's going to ask about the non-credit bearing coursework. So educational activities that are available to students, and specifically these activities must have articulated learning outcomes, a clearly structured and developmental approach to learning, and most importantly, an assessment of student learning. Without all these characteristics, any activities really wouldn't be co-curriculum or wouldn't be considered co-curriculum. So leadership pedagogy is the educational methodology used in curricular and co-curricular offerings. So describing the methodologies used by faculty and staff would be under this section, and asking questions like what kind of training or support is offered to faculty and staff to develop in these methodologies or these. Leadership scholarship looks at new knowledge about leadership that is being produced, how it is being used within the institution and beyond the institution. And this framework is aimed to look at the whole picture. But I'd like to give you an idea of what kind of data we will be asking for in one of these subsections. So let's take a closer look at the foundational indicators. The data in this section is very varied, and it will include, like I said, policies, norms, routines, and practices. And you'll see on the left the subsections within the foundational indicators and some shortened versions of the questions on the right. So for this first question, is leadership a part of the mission and vision? If so, we ask you to provide it. So essentially a copy paste of what that mission and vision look like. We're interested in knowing how developing, educating, or researching about leadership is a core function of the university. Under communication, do members of the executive leadership team promote a commitment to leadership? So is it mentioned in their speeches, in their op-eds? If you're filling this part out, you may have to scour through speeches, videos, or reach out to the university's comm team. And also we'd like to see examples of that plastered on the application to really get a sense of how and when these things are mentioned by the executive team. For this third question, we want applicants to describe if there is a coordinating center in charge of all things leadership, or if there are several offices in charge of it. How do they communicate and coordinate? I think Ryan referenced this earlier when he was talking about that research that we did with some universities across the US and how so many times we would get reference to another center or another office. So getting to do a survey maybe around campus to find out just how many centers are doing similar things. It's also quite possible you weren't aware of many of these centers. So it's a great time to self-examine and really gather all this data to have a better, clear picture of what is being done on campus. Okay, so under HR, we want to know, like I said at the beginning, it's really about all stakeholders. So we want to know about faculty and staff as well. So how leadership abilities and knowledge are being developed in staff and faculty, which is why we'd want to know, are there courses offered to them, workshops, coaching sessions? Typically, you'd need to reach out to HR probably for this information or include a stakeholder in the team that fills out the application from HR. That would be ideal. Under assessments, and I think you'll see assessments and measurement is a recurring theme in the application. And it really is a central, I think, point that we want to make, that we're looking for information on any systematic campus-wide assessments that examine outcomes. For example, at Rice, we have an assessment embedded into the end-of-year survey. And some schools also use the multi-institutional leadership study or something similar. So any mention of that would go here. Collaboration with your school's Office of Institutional Research or similar office will come in handy here. And for this last question, we're looking at how leadership for public purpose aligns with other institutional priorities. So information for questions like this might be in different departments across school. For this question around alumni engagement, we would know some information at the Dorr Institute because thanks to some initial data gathered by Ryan Brown, who is on this call, we were able to prove a correlation between participating leader development programs and higher rate of alumni donation. So just the same, this could be information that is gathered by donor and alumni relations at your school. So I think one of the common themes from all of these questions that I went through is that partnerships around campus really are essential, and it's something that has come up so many times in our pilot cohort. Creating a team early on will be a key step in this process. And this subsection that I talked through, the foundational indicators, really is one of the most varied sections out there. So I really wanted to give you a a look at how that data might present. So for this idea of partnerships around campus, I think it's a part of this process that takes the most time. In our pilot cohort, people have been really stuck on this step of the initial kickoff. So I think it's really one of the first steps to apply for this classification. And I'll give you some more tips and tricks now that I think are just very essential and that have become really clear throughout this pilot. For this application process, we really do recommend a team or a committee or a group that is in charge of filling out this application. But it can also be very helpful to have a central figure be in charge of gathering some of that initial data and then coordinating the rest of it. So tasking other members to help with data gathering can be really helpful throughout the process. And trying to be inclusive of the people you do partnerships with around campus. Some offices may have very different definitions of leadership. It's important to even have the conversations around this, to have them be a part of this and effectively start the change process, because it really is a change process and it's not really a one-time engagement or a one-time application that you fill out. In the formal application cycle, a president or provost approval is required. So it's important to start acclimating people on campus right away to this idea. And like I said, it's the step that probably takes the longest, but once that is done, things go by so quickly. And a lot of this process is really enabled and starts to thrive. The framing of this process is also a key part. Unlike accreditations, this self-examination can feel less high stakes for a lot of people, and this is what we've heard from people in the pilot cohort. But it can prove to be a very rewarding process to uncover so many unknowns around campus. Other offices that were doing similar things to yours, they had measurements, you didn't have measurements, so it really just starts to complement all the work that is being done on campus. And the application just really provides a space for you to write all of that down and provide evidence. Aligning this process to others that are similar can also help, and processes like accreditations, awards, the ILA guiding questions or principles, the CAS standards, although they're not exactly the same, your institution may have already gathered similar data for other purposes, and it's just never been gathered this way, but it is out there probably. And this process really should be, I think, reflective of each institution type and context. We've heard from bigger universities, unlike Rice, that have committees with subcommittees that are filling out this application, and that works for them. So whatever your process is, I think one of the key things is to start talking about it right away and acclimating people and stakeholders on campus to achieve buy-in early on. And I can really keep talking about this for a very long time because it is about 90% of my job to worry about this classification. But I think what would be really, really helpful is to hear probably from Aaron Ruth, the executive director of the Center for Leadership at University of Colorado, and have him speak more about what his experience has been like so that he can share any insights that might be helpful for all of you out there. So I'll stop talking and turn it over to Aaron so that he can share some insights.
Yeah, thank you, Carla. And CU Boulder is proud to be part of the pilot cohort for this elective classification. By way of background, CU Boulder, the flagship university for the state of Colorado, about 35,000 students spread across 8 schools or colleges. Our chancellor, Phil DeStefano, he's been at CU for more than 40 years, the last 10 plus as the chancellor. And during his tenure as the chancellor, he developed 3 imperatives for the university: to shape tomorrow's leaders, to be an innovative research university, and to positively impact humanity. which sound wonderful, and we love them. But as Ryan said, that kind of language is quite ubiquitous. And so the natural question is, what are you doing to ensure that you meet those imperatives? What concrete or tangible steps are you doing to ensure that you're having the impact that you say you're having? And so to the Chancellor's credit, he decided to first take on the title of Endowed Chair in Leadership. So we had an Endowed Leadership Chair. He took on that title. But again, that's just a title change. So what more can we do? And with his leadership and his support, we convened a group and decided to establish a Center for Leadership to connect those pockets, again, as Ryan mentioned, of those that are doing this work across academics, student affairs, athletics. And so the Center for Leadership started a year ago to unify and catalyze the CU leadership ecosystem. We currently have 27 affiliated programs under our umbrella. And about the same time that was happening, we brought on an academic director to lead some research initiatives. Her name is Stephanie Johnson. She's a tenured faculty member in our School of Business, and she just happens to be a graduate of Rice University. And so she's familiar with the Doerr Institute. Yes, Tom. And so she brought this idea of the Carnegie elective classification to me and our executive committee. And I have to be honest, I was skeptical at first, and I wasn't sure, why we would go through this process or what Doerr was getting out of it. But then I did meet with the Doerr Institute. Met with Tom, Carla, to better understand the process and the background. And it became very clear to me that there are three principal advantages for us at CU Boulder. The first is external validation, which I think was mentioned earlier. It is a benefit to have, we all say we're the best at leadership. It's nice to have an objective review and a nationally recognized organization like Carnegie to validate that. And I can share our fundraisers in particular appreciate that or will appreciate that validation. Internally, for me, the two more important advantages were first to identify blind spots in our own leadership ecosystem. And, I felt at the time it was difficult to see the forest through the trees. And I was so in the weeds with developing leadership. I wasn't sure what we were missing, and I was sure we were missing something. And just as an example, at CU Boulder, one of the big things we were missing were the measurements and not being rigorous enough in our Office of Data Analytics and getting that data back from our students. And so we've fixed that, and we've reached out to the Office of Data Analytics as a result of our process and going through this classification, application. And there's some other benefits to include increased work with our faculty and staff. And so I just think identifying those blind spots were hugely helpful. The third primary advantage for me has been learning from others and sharing best practices across the country. And so we knew that we had a lot to learn, and the Doerr Institute has hosted webinars and Zoom meetings with breakout rooms where we've been able to talk to peer institutions across the nation. And it's both partially learning from them and then partially commiserating too. So it kind of makes you feel better about where we're at. So it's been a wonderfully, I think, beneficial program to be a part of over the last year. As far as what should an institution be doing to prepare, I think Carla touched on it. It's meeting and getting to know everyone, both programs and individuals across the university who have shared values around the importance of leadership development. And so I started with that about 3 or 4 years ago, lots and lots of coffees and lunches. We do these collectively, but the individual one-on-one meetings to just meet an organization, learn about their approach to leadership, what their challenges are, how they're structured, has been hugely beneficial. And so I think that's an ongoing process, but that's maybe the best thing you can do is just start meeting people and forming those relationships. And then what has been helpful for us, the most helpful aspect of going through the application process has been gaining the support of university senior leadership. And we're fortunate that the Chancellor is the head of our Center for Leadership. He's intimately involved with this, and I meet with him regularly. But he also had me meet with all the deans of our schools and colleges and key department heads. So for about a year, I was eager to get going. He slowed me down and said really had to go slow to go fast. And so I had to meet with the senior leadership across the university, also the provost. Later today, I'm meeting with our new chief operating officer to explain the center, what we're trying to do and ensure that we're nested within the university's strategic priorities. But I think that senior leadership support is very important. The other helpful part is attend the door webinars or breakout rooms or Zoom calls if your schedule allows. It's been very helpful to connect with my colleagues across the country. Well, I can answer any specific questions, but I'll stop there and just end with, I strongly recommend going through the process for the elective classification. It's not easy, it's not quick, it's very time consuming, but it's extraordinarily beneficial. And I'll turn it back over to Carla.
Thank you, Aaron. That was really helpful, I think, for a lot of people to visualize what this application process can be. And I think you bring up such an important point that I don't think I had thought about, and it's gaining a lot of visibility within your institution and what leader development programs are doing within the university and achieving, and also being seen as an added value within the university is so important. And I think you're right that it does help do that. So I'll talk quickly and more about this consortium. This consortium really is a community of scholars and practitioners that are interested in sharing improvements around leader development and education. We share best resources, we get together in Zoom meetings. We initially started this back in January 2020, like Tom said. We were about 30 of us, and it's that top picture that you see on the screen. I think it was the last big gathering I was a part of, which is crazy. It feels so long ago. And that's where this whole idea of the consortium started, and it's grown to be 102 institutions, 168 individuals, and that represents around 1.9 million students. And I think this community has been so helpful to think around this and toss around this idea of the classification, get input from all these people, share best practices and resources. And it's been really one of the key elements, I think, in getting and executing this classification and going through with this project. A lot of like-minded people wanting to talk about improvements in this area, so it has been extremely helpful through this process. How can you become a member? It's extremely easy. We make it so easy for you to become a member. Please become a member. The more the merrier, really. In fact, there will be a barcode in the next slide for you to scan with your phone camera so that you can sign up pretty quickly. We don't require anything major, just an interest in improving leader development and leadership education across the nation and globally. So if you're interested in forming part of our consortium, please look out for that barcode in the next slide. We have a lot of plans and vision for this community of scholars and practitioners. I think Tom can help us articulate more of that vision in the next slide. But it's really just been such a key part of this whole process. So I hope that all of you will consider joining the consortium and joining more like-minded people like Aaron and us on this call to talk more about how we can elevate the status of leadership development and education. Tom, I'll turn it over to you.
Well, sure, just briefly, more and better leaders. That's what we're about at the Dorr Institute. We don't sell anything, we share everything. And it's important to understand that we, in terms of the consortium and the Carnegie classification, we're just managers and administrators. We will help Carnegie process all of the applications, but we will parse those out to people in the consortium to be our external reviewers, and we'll provide some training for that, and we will pay them for that. So we don't make these decisions about the applications. It's the consortium that will be represented by reviewers. Someone asked me an interesting question one time about this Carnegie classification. They said, is it the carrot or the stick? Because that's the way you motivate people, right? And the answer I came up with is 100% carrot. You know, there are no drawbacks to participating. It's all positive. If all you do is get the self-examination, we win, because now we've helped you move your university forward into a more sophisticated understanding of what they're doing. Now, we will make sure that achieving the classification is a unique value proposition for colleges and universities. So it's going to be a big carrot once you're over the bar, because people in the community are going to start paying attention. With more than 100 people in the consortium now, and the classification isn't even public yet. Our thoughts are that in January, February, March, when it goes public, we'll probably get 4 to 5 times that many universities in participation for the classification. That's going to represent over 10 million students. And it will be, across higher education, it will be very difficult to ignore that the classification exists and that it validates a university's claim of developing more and better leaders. So it's all carrot. It's just a great opportunity, and we're looking forward to carrying it forward as big and as grand a scale as we can. So with that, I think we've got some time left. We'd really like questions from attendees. If you could put them in chat, and Carla or Sadhana will help get the questions out to the panel, and we'll do our best to answer what any of those questions might be.
Well, thank you so much, Tom. And I'm really, really excited. And while participants are putting in questions they might have, let me just kick it off by asking you, how does this classification differ from the ILA Guiding Principles project that has been also in place? And maybe any one of the panelists can take it off, and maybe I can begin with Tom and then Carla.
Sure. Well, you know, quite simply, the ILA standards are directed at programs primarily.
Mm-hmm.
And they're to help people who are building programs and want to do so with standards of excellence and so forth. The Carnegie classification is a university level classification. So it covers the waterfront, HR, faculty, staff, budgeting, university's philosophy and strategy. So it's much higher level, but both, I think, work in concert with one another to create, can you help us out there? To create a unified approach in some respects. So it's not just the program people sort of at the bottom of the execution chain trying to do good work. It's the university level analysis that helps get them the resources and resources that they need to get it done. Carla, can you add to that a little bit?
Yeah, I think you did a great job explaining that, Tom. And I think the ILA provides such a great granular point to analyze the program, and really looks at just even the framework and the context and conceptual framework. So it really makes you think when you are creating a program, like you said, Tom, or developing something new or improving an existing program. So if you use those standards or guiding questions to guide the development of your program or your design, it'll be quite easy to translate some of that information into the Carnegie classification. And the last time we spoke and talked about and were working on these guiding questions, we were even discussing the idea of aligning what sections of the Carnegie classification might align to specific questions that the ILA has developed. So like Tom said, they align nicely, but they have different focuses, I think.
That's super. And I'm seeing some questions coming in. So Terry Morrow Nelson says, I'd like to be involved. And, you know, this is very, very cool because now you can see how you've inspired people. But she did miss part, Terry missed part of the session. And so she would like to know, or he would like to know whether, how they would be able to be involved in the project. So there's another question from John Banter, and he's asking, how would we be able to get the application to begin the process for our institution?
Carla, I think that one's for you.
Definitely. I was looking for how to unmute. So thank you for your question. We have an application already that is being used by our pilot cohort. And I think if no major edits happen, that will be the same application that we use. So please feel free to reach out to me personally at my email, and I'll share with you the applications so that you can take a look at what that's shaping up to be. We also have an appendix within our book, Leadership Reckoning, where it details some of those subsections and some sample questions. But if you would like to take a look at the whole application, please reach out to me and I'll be sure to share it.
Super. Thank you, Carla. Is there anyone who would like to add a little more? And Aaron, would you like to talk about the application process a little bit, just to cast light on how easy, how difficult it was? Carla already told us it's really easy.
That's not what I heard her say, and it's
I
because
just made it up.
Yeah, it's not easy, I don't think, but I don't think anything worth doing is easy. So it's comprehensive, it's thorough, it requires a good bit of time, but I think, as Carla mentioned, I think if you delegate properly and if you have the connections, then I think it does happen pretty quickly. We were fortunate to have started those connections about a year or two earlier. I think it would have taken much longer had we, kind of started cold to meet all those players around the different campus and get that buy-in. So I think how easy or hard it is very much dependent around how connected the leadership ecosystem is across your university. So I think it's situationally dependent.
Yeah, thank you, Aaron. So Glenn had a question. Glenn asks, what is the timeline for applying for the classification? Having led the application for the Carnegie Classification and Community Engagement at my institution, I know it is now available on a 6-year cycle. Previously, it was available every 5 years, lasted 10 years. When first launched, it was open annually or every other year.
That's a great question. And I'm sorry, what was the person's name?
That was Glenn.
Glenn, thank you for your question, Glenn. And I had a similar discussion with our Carnegie liaisons, and I think we are trying to stick to a similar schedule as the community engagement classification. And I know they're undergoing or have undergone or will undergo some changes in that cycle. So I think it'll be closer to that every 5 years and then a 2-year cycle. So the cycle will be open for at least 1.5 years for institutions to apply. And there will be also just rolling evaluations going on throughout that 1.5 to 2 years. And once you receive your classification, you will hold that for about 5 to 6 years. And then you would have to reclassify.
Yeah. Thank you so much. So I guess I'm curious about another question, which is improvement science global? What are your thoughts? And these are thoughts for the panelists.
Well, having read the book on improvement science that Carnegie has published, I can tell you that the process is clearly globally applicable. Mm-hmm. Carnegie themselves have taken measured approaches to introduce their processes and classifications in Canada, Australia. I believe they have some plans for South Africa, for Central Europe. And with respect to the Door Institute's administration of it, we take our guidance from Carnegie there. And if they say they want a broader global application, we're prepared to make that happen. So it's up to us and Carnegie to determine how broadly they want to open this up. I will say that there's a likelihood that once we get the classification established in the US, that we will develop a parallel process, whether it's results in a Carnegie classification or not, but a parallel process that would be open globally, because we've already discussed our plans to do this with universities in Canada, in England, in Sweden, and other countries that are interested in leadership and leader development. So we're going to make it very easy for people to participate in the self-examination, and then it's up to Carnegie as the classification granting institution to determine, where they want to go with it.
Super. So what is this all going to look like in 2 years, do you think?
So I think in 2 years, we will have in excess of 500 universities that apply for the classification. Probably 2/3 of them will achieve the standards that the reviewers will have applied. I think you're going to see parents and students very interested in whether their university has a Carnegie classification for leadership, education, and development, or leadership for public purpose. I think there's going to be enthusiastic participation. Those of you who have been involved with the community engagement classification know that there are about, Carla, maybe 400, 450 schools that have achieved that classification. We have found that the interest in universities around leadership and leader development, even as compared to the very popular community engagement, is significantly more. So it wouldn't surprise me if in 2 years we had approaching 1,000 schools participating, impacting probably close to 20 million students.
Goodness, you'll all have to be cloned to meet the numbers of people. But there is another question from Tony, who says, out of curiosity, what is the cost per university, and are there different rates based on the university classification?
Have we fixed that yet, Carla? Have we made a decision? So we're thinking something along the lines of about $1,000 per university to apply. We're not sure how we're going to handle the pilot schools because they've helped us out, so probably they'll be free. We think any university, $1,000 is well within their budget to participate in this, and we do have to pay the reviewers. But this has definitely not been designed as any kind of moneymaker. This is designed with a commitment towards improvement in leadership, education, and development, period. And if a university couldn't afford the $1,000, then they just need to come to us and we'll work something out.
Right. Well, thank you so much.
Oh, yeah, sorry. We just don't really want any type of barrier for schools to be able to apply. So if it's a concern, then they should just approach us about it.
Sure. So I think we are coming fairly close to the end of this webinar, but I was just wondering if you had any other thoughts, the panelists, before we close. I don't see any other questions right now.
Well, if I could just kind of pull it together for the folks here, the thing I'd really like to do is offer up some gratitude first to Aaron Roof for participating and also for being the first university to complete the classification application process. He's been a great partner in this. I also have to thank Ryan Brown, who really his role as managing director for measurement has given an example to a lot of universities that leadership and leader development can be hardened, that there is a data science behind it, that there is measurement behind it. And in a myth-busting way, getting rid of this notion that leadership can't be measured, getting rid of the notion that a four-year education in and of itself develops students as leaders. Just busting that myth has been a huge contribution, and I'm grateful to Ryan for it. And then Dr. Ortega Santori, you know, Carla has really lit into this project with passion, and she's been highly effective and successful, and we just can't be more grateful to her. She also had to fight to get into this panel today. She's in San Juan, Puerto Rico, and there were some issues with power there. Last time it was Texas, now it's San Juan, but she was able to get it done. So Carla, thanks so much for all you do in this project, for being the liaison with Carnegie and with all the consortium universities, and just a terrific effort. So thank you.
So see, as you did your closing, Omar has a question for you and asks, would this be applicable for nonprofit organizations that intend to initiate a leadership development program?
I don't think it would be officially available to nonprofits that aren't classified by the Carnegie Foundation as a higher education institution. I would certainly encourage Omar to use our framework if that's helpful for him, or use the ILA guiding questions or standards if that's more helpful. But any institution that wants to classify needs to be categorized by the Carnegie Foundation.
I think a nonprofit would find the Leadership Reckoning book to be really useful. And we go over our 4 fundamental principles in there, that leader development has to be a core function of the organization, use evidence-based techniques, use professional people, and measure results. Those 4 principles are applicable in nonprofits, in business, in education. It's just a good way of doing business. So I'd pick up a copy of Leadership Reckoning, which, by the way, we've given away more than 2,000 copies of that to university presidents and provosts and to other people who need the information. So we're not about selling books, we're about providing information.
That's wonderful. Well, you know, and I think that throughout this hour, I learned some of these main things that have always bothered me about leadership education and development, and one of them is institutional will. And while all of you have referred to it in many ways, it's so important, I think, for a project like this. And so there's a real, personally, I think there's a real need for institutions to have political will, like chancellors and presidents, to be behind something like this. I loved, Aaron, that you said that, you know, you can look at this and have a look at your blind spots, you know. So it allows you to really start robustly learning about what your programs are doing, how they're really, what their strengths are and what their weaknesses are. And I think the external validation part of it is really important, in my opinion, where you get so used to doing your own thing, and then suddenly someone comes and tells you this one amazing thing, and it's like, oh my God, I forgot. And then learning from others, it brings a whole heck of a lot of humility, I think. And the last part, I think, is, you know, leadership development and education is for every single one of us to really adopt at this point. And I find that even as the Rockefeller Center, we are committed to it, and we look at public policy and leadership in that way. So we are at the end of this. I want to thank all of you. It was really, really fun to be with you. Despite internet cuts, power cuts, all of us were able to join in. So thank you so much.
Thank you.